Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Gaunitai ki, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning, reading from Canto 10, Chapter 41, and the verse for today is 13 and 14. Thank you. So 13 is on the board. So we'll be chanting responsively. Punihi pada rajasam grano grina medinam Yakchoche nanut payanti. Pitara sagnaya sunaha. Punihi pada rajasam. Grano griha medinam. Yakchoche nanut priyanti. Pitara sagnaya suraha. Punihi padarajasam. Grano griha medinam. Yakchoche nanu piyanti. Pitana sagnaya suraha. Please chant. Punihi padarajasam. Grihanyam grihamedinam. Yakchoche nanutpriyanti. Pitara sagnaya suraha. Punihi padarajasam. Grihano grihamedinam. Yakchoche nanutpriyanti. Pitara sagnaya sunaha. Punihi padarajasa. Grihano grihamedinam. Yakchoche nanutpriyanti. Pitara sagnaya suraha. And the word for word. Punihi, please purify. Pada, of your feet. Rajasa, with the dust. Grihan, the home. Naha, of us. Griha medinam, who are attached to household ritual duties. Yat, by which. Sochena, purification. Anu, triptyanti, will become satisfied. Pitaraha, my forefathers. Asa, together with. Agraya, the sacrificial fires. Suraha, and the demigods. And the translation for text 13. I'm simply an ordinary householder attached to ritual sacrifices. So please purify my home with the dust of your lotus feet. By that act of purification, my forefathers, the sacrificial fires, and the demigods will become satisfied. And text 14. Avanyani yugayam asit syokya balir mahan asvanyam atulam lebhe gatse paikantanam tuyam. The translation for text 14. By bathing your feet, the exalted Bali Maharaj attained not only glorious fame and unequaled power, but also the final destination of pure devotees. Om Jnana Timrandasya Gnanjana Shalakaya Chakshudunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutanam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Tamsha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapsa Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Ram Padaswami Iti Namine Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I'll read the translation of text 13 again. This is Akura speaking, addressing Krishna. I'm simply an ordinary householder attached to ritual sacrifices, so please purify my home with the dust of your lotus feet. By that act of purification, my forefathers, the sacrificial fires, and the demigods will all become satisfied. Akura makes a statement defining himself. I'm simply an ordinary householder attached to ritual sacrifices. In a similar vein, in terms of defining householders or householder life, Maharaj Parikshit, he had asked Sukadev Goswami this particular question. O great sage, why did King Priyavrata, who was a great self-realized devotee of the Lord, remain in household life, which is the root cause of the bondage of karma, fruitive activities, and which defeats the mission of human life? That's from Srimad Bhagavatam in the 3rd canto and the 1st chapter. So the problem of human, or the problem of household life is identified. One becomes bound up by the result of fruitive activities. Or at any rate, one looks to the result of activities as a means of enjoyment. So this is the problem in householder life, and it's defined by Maharaj Parikshit even in asking his question of Sukadev Goswami. And there's a consequence for approaching life in this way, and that is that there's a development on the subtle level, and later on it'll manifest grossly, of a material body. So a future material body is being created with this particular way of performing actions, that one's looking towards one's activities as a means of enjoyment. And Krishna explains this particular point of what the consequence is of thinking in that way. And this is how Krishna puts it. Actions pertaining to the development of material bodies of the living entities is called karma, or fruitive activities. So that's Bhuta Bhavodo Hava Karo. Vishaga karma sanjimitaha. So Bhagavad Gita 8:3. So that consequence is due to the fact that every living being, particularly in a human body, I should say, has an option to take different positions. So this is the option. One is he can identify himself with dark material nature or dark material matter, or he can identify himself with superior spiritual nature. That's the option that exists there. That's actions that are performed for a result of enjoyment, with a consciousness of enjoyment of a particular kind, because there's infinite varieties that one may be looking as a means of enjoyment through one's actions or even the activities one's performing with the end of enjoyment. It brings with it the development of a particular kind of material body. So depending upon, what one is selecting in one's consciousness as one's form of enjoyment through one's actions, it's developing a particular kind of material body that's going to manifest in the next lifetime. And that could be that form of enjoyment is slowly creating an animal body for habitation in the future, or even of a beast in the future, or even of a demigod. So those are the consequences. Now, returning to the definition of a householder or householder life that Akura is giving, he says there's attachment to ritual sacrifice. So, different angle. So this means that an action is performed also with the aim of enjoyment, albeit it's postponed enjoyment. So that's what a ritual sacrifice is. It's postponed enjoyment. So a sacrifice or a yajna may be performed to attain the most elite of material destinations. That may be the purpose. The heavenly planets. So, you often, these days I'm still surprised because of so many things being done electronically, but there are many bricks and mortar buildings where you'll see travel agents. And if you walk past one, often they have pictures of these extraordinary destinations to attract one. And indeed, I've found myself when I walk past such places, I get quite absorbed by, the beautiful visuals. Usually it's some very peaceful looking water with some very peaceful looking palm trees. It looks very idyllic and there's not a human in sight. It's like pristine and pure and untouched. So a yajna can be like that. It's you aiming for a material destination, a very elite one, the heavenly planets. Now, that postponed enjoyment allows for the development of a heavenly body. So, and it is going to allow for residence in that region. So it will also be a visit, but a long visit, such that you actually become a resident of that heavenly planet. Now, since the action was karma, means it's an action that's performed with the idea of some enjoyment. So, since the action was karma, residence in both that body, that heavenly body, and the place is permitted only with the karmic results of material piety until it's exhausted. So it's the same thing. When you buy a ticket to one of those exotic destinations on one of those posters in a travel shop, usually you have to actually have a return flight. And the reason for that is that that exotic location country is not going to allow you in unless you have that return flight, because you can't imagine that you're just going to move in and take up residence there with your one ticket. It doesn't work like that. So, so the heavenly planets, because the yagya is that allowing for that visit in the future to that heavenly planet. And if there are many such yagyas, one may be able to take up residence there. But it's also contingent on the amount of yagyas. There's, you're going to be allowed so much time to stay there. And of course, the unusual thing here is like when you do purchase a ticket in a travel agent, it's not that you transform your body. You may transform your wardrobe a bit and go shopping for, clothing that's suitable for an exotic sonic place. But it's not that your body is transformed. I mean, once you're there, you may have a suntan, but it's not that your body is transformed. But going to the getting entrance into the heavenly planets through this ritual sacrifice that Akura is referring to actually gives also a body suitable for habitation in that region. So, all the things that are required, such a body that has a longer duration compared to, say, having a body that's on this earthly planet. Now, these ritual sacrifices are described in the Chandogya Upanishad as per Srila Prabhupada, because I'm drawing from him, I did not look in the Chandogya Upanishad. And this is how Srila Prabhupada puts it. There are 5 kinds of offerings which are made into 5 kinds of fire. So the 5 kinds of fire, and this is quoting directly from Srila Prabhupada, the 5 kinds of fire are conceived of as the heavenly planets. So this is your ideal, what you're aiming for. That's where are you going to get enjoyment? So heavenly planets, clouds, the earth, man and woman. I've often, not often, but I have come across even devotees, or maybe devotees early on in their Krishna consciousness, who have performed just such a sacrifice with the idea of attaining a spouse. I have been exposed to that. So man and woman. And the 5 kinds of sacrificial offerings are one's faith. So you're offering your faith because you have to believe that you're going to get that enjoyment when you're performing such a sacrifice. You yourself, the moon, rain, grains, and semen. Generally, one sees grains being offered into the sacrificial fire, generally, but these are other things listed by Srila Prabhupada that come from the Chandogya Upanishad. Now, Akura is, however, identifying with spiritual nature. So remember, there was the option of what a human being can choose. So he's identifying with spiritual nature because he knows his constitutional position as a servitor of Lord Krishna. So he's not making the choice of persons who are performing such karmic or activities that are karmic. He wants the dust of Lord Krishna's lotus feet. That's Akura's aim. So he has a different end in mind. As opposed to the fruitive person, whose satisfaction lies in the activities, Akura's satisfaction lies in his engaging in the Lord's service. So it's a different kind of idea of satisfaction, what will give you happiness, because happiness is connected to satisfaction. And in terms of Maharaj Parikshit, the question of an elevated devotee remaining in household life, Srila Sukadeva Goswami states that devotees are liberated persons. He makes a generalization. So they're liberated from identifying with material nature. That's the freedom that comes with becoming a devotee. So the first option is not an option that a devotee ever chooses, to identify with material nature. I mean, it may happen because of consciousness and patterns in the mind, but always the choice is the other, identifying with spiritual nature. And it's for this reason, being liberated from identifying with material nature, that they cannot possibly be fully absorbed in family affairs. This is the response of Sukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit in the 5th canto. Now, the devotee understands the transcendental position of Lord Krishna, and through executing devotional service to the Lord, he gets a deeper understanding, or just by making that choice of identifying with spiritual nature, he's coming to understand Lord Krishna through performing service to him. Now, Sukadeva Goswami, in continuing to address Maharaj Parikshit's question, that is why a liberated person remains in household life, he says the following: elevated Mahatmas who have taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are fully satiated by the shade of those lotus feet. Their consciousness cannot possibly become attached to family members. And that particular verse, since it has relevance to this discussion of Akura, Mahatma Hai Vipranse. I'm so scared, my computer changes the Sanskrit, and so now I'm hesitating every time I'm reading a verse. Anyway, hopefully it hasn't done that. Uttama shloka padayo chaya nirvritam chitanam nakutumbe spirha matihi. So this explanation that the elevated devotee who has taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord is fully satiated by the shade of those lotus feet, it's implied in Akura's statement. Because this was his statement. The purified water, and the word that was used was chauchena, from your feet, which will fall on my head and in the courtyard of my house, will satisfy all the demigods, sacrificial fires, and my ancestors. So this is actually his thought, and it's spelt out by Srila Vishwanath. Now, aside from the satisfaction in serving the Lord through bathing his lotus feet, there's the satisfaction that will be experienced by the demigods, by the sacrificial fire, and by the ancestors. So there's an explanation given by Lord Krishna, and this will lead to the next part of explaining Akura's logic. In Bhagavad Gita 9:17, Krishna explains, or gives an explanation that allows one to understand Vedic sacrifice, or yajna, that are karmic activities. And he explains it in such a way that it's actually, even that karmic activity is actually him. Even though the performer is focused on his enjoyment, Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita that that sacrifice is in fact himself. So this is how he puts it. That same sacrificial fire, the fire being a material element, is actually a separated energy of Krishna. And that fire, we heard, it could be conceived of as a heavenly planet, because that will be that idea of enjoyment is going to come through attaining a heavenly planet. or it could be a man or a woman. But in actual fact, that fire is Krishna. This is him himself explaining it. And the sacrifice performed to please Pritirloka, or the abode of the ancestors, which receive oblations of ghee. That sacrifice itself is Krishna. He says it, and here are his words. But it is I who am the ritual, I the sacrifice, the offering to the ancestors, the healing herb, the transcendental chant. I am the butter and the fire and the offering. But this, again, unless one's identifying with spiritual nature, one will be looking at even that sacrificial offering from a karmic point of view. It's an activity that's going to bring one enjoyment. Or, it's a pious activity, but there's this up ahead, there's going to be enjoyment. So it's delayed enjoyment. You're just delaying your enjoyment, but you're going to get greater enjoyment through performing the sacrifice. Now, those identifying with material nature, and hence it said are burning in the fire of material activities, because it's like a raging fire, this idea that enjoyment is going to come. So it arouses this intense passion and fire to get to that enjoyment. It can, in fact, come under the cooling shade of Krishna's lotus feet. And Srila Narottam Das Thakur, in Manaha Shiksha, Teachings to the Mind, he sings in this way. I'm not going to sing since that's not my strength, but these are his words. Nitai pada kamala koti chandra shushitala ye jayai jagata jurai. So the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda is where one will get the soothing moonlight of millions of moons, so that one will be fully relieved from material existence and satiated. So it means that identification with the activities that will supposedly bring happiness is what one's going to be relieved from. So there's a comment by Srila Prabhupada that the distinction between family life and spiritual life, it can be experienced by any person. And this is quite a wry comment in one sense. He says that ability to make that distinction between family life and spiritual life is any person who's experienced living in family life and having undergone the distresses of living with the family. So this is Srila Prabhupada's very wry comment that there are quite a lot of distresses that come with living with the family. And, if I sort of scan through my mind, my own upbringing, I can certainly say that distresses were there, even though there's this idea that there's enjoyment in family life. And like in my case, the distresses, the parents are so busy working in their business that there's scant attention to the children. So, the absorption is on, the fruitive activity of accumulating wealth. So now Akura goes on to say, by washing your feet, Bali Maharaj attained a position of great fame. And the words that was used was slokyaha. He attained unrivaled power and the destination of the pure devotees. So that was text 14. So the description of this event follows. So I'm going to read to sort of paint the picture of what has been described by Akura. So first, this washing of the feet of Bali Maharaj. So I'm quoting Bali Maharaj, jubilant at seeing Lord Vamanadev, whose beautiful limbs contributed equally to the beauty of his entire body, offered him a seat with great satisfaction. Thus, offering a proper reception to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who's always beautiful to the liberated soul, Bali Maharaj worshipped him by washing his lotus feet. So that's the description. He's experiencing so much transcendental pleasure in his senses, perceiving the beauty of Lord Vamanadev and his limbs. And similar to the reasoning employed by Akura, Bali Maharaj says the following: "O my Lord, because you have kindly arrived at our home, all my forefathers are satisfied. Our family and entire dynasty have been sanctified, and the sacrifice we are performing now is complete because of your presence." And continue. "O son of a Brahmana, today the fire of sacrifice is ablaze according to the injunction of the Shastras, and I have been freed from all the sinful reactions of my life by the water that has washed your lotus feet." So very similar to Akura's sentiment. All the reactions of my life have been, by the water that has washed your lotus feet, those sinful reactions have been nullified. "O my Lord, by the touch of your small lotus feet, the entire surface of the world has been sanctified." So that's Bali Maharaj speaking as to the power of the water that has washed the lotus feet of Lord Vamanadev. And so it's very similar to Akura having his understanding that he's imploring Lord Krishna to come to his home rather than remaining with the rest of the wagons and the rest of the Vraja community outside the city, but rather, please come to my home because this is going to be what's going to result. So, now, Bali Maharaj had been performing an Ashwamedha sacrifice, so it was a very huge undertaking. And it was under the patronage of the Brahmanas belonging to the Bhrigu dynasty. So actually, Lord Vamanadev had been very attracted to personally come to that sacrifice, even though, as we've read, all the components of a sacrifice, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is personally present there. Now, Srila Prabhupada gives a commentary on the position of Bali Maharaj, and this describes the position through a comparison. So this is because I want to highlight the other part of Akura's statement, which was that he attained unrivaled power and the destination of the pure devotees and attained a position of great fame. So here's something of the great fame of Bali Maharaj, and it's put across by Srila Prabhupada in such an amazing way because he makes this comparison. If one accepts a poverty-stricken position because of losing money in business or in gambling, or in prostitution, or in intoxication, no one will praise him. But if one becomes poverty-stricken by giving all his possessions in charity, he becomes adored all over the world. So different ways of becoming poverty-stricken, depending on the consciousness. Aside from this, if a benevolent and merciful person exhibits his pride in becoming poverty-stricken by giving his possessions in charity for good causes, his poverty is a welcome and auspicious sign of a great personality. So one can even be proud about having given one's wealth in charity. It's perfectly fine because everybody's going to adore that person and consider him a great personality. Actually what comes to my mind, I remember reading, there was a former king of England, very brief reign because he didn't want to be in that position. And I think it was in the 50s, the 1950s. And anyway, he got married to a woman who'd been divorced, and at that time it was completely unacceptable. And certainly for somebody in the royal order to do that, it was not acceptable. So they ended up living in exile, so to speak. I mean, they left England, and I recall reading that at the end of their lives, so the king or former king left his body, then 13 years later, the wife left her body, and the wealth, which was something like $50 million, which must have been very huge in the 1950s, the entire wealth went to a charity. But one doesn't necessarily think what a great person, because in their particular case, they had not kept up their connection with the royal dynasty. Yeah. So Bali Maharaj decided that even though he would become poverty-stricken by giving everything to Vamanadev, this is what he would prefer. So this is something of that extraordinary great personality that you can recognize for giving charity in a way that was appropriate. And Srila Prabhupada, he gives an explanation to his spiritual master that echoes the reasoning of Akura. So here's Srila Prabhupada. O great sage, great saintly person, sorry, I'm wrong. This is actually Bali Maharaj speaking to his spiritual master, and it's echoing something of Akura's thinking. O great sage, great saintly persons like you, being completely aware of the Vedic principle for performing ritualistic ceremonies and yagyas, worship Lord Vishnu in all circumstances. Therefore, whether that same Lord Vishnu has come here to give me all benedictions or to punish me as an enemy, I must carry out his order and give him the required tract of land without hesitation. So his spiritual master was opposing Bali Maharaj giving everything because that particular spiritual master was monetarily dependent on Bali Maharaj. So if Bali Maharaj were to give everything to Lord Vamanadev, he was concerned about his own position. So he was advising Bali Maharaj, don't actually give this Brahmana what he's asking for. But the explanation that Bali Maharaj gives of why he's choosing to actually give all his possessions is, and he's talking to his spiritual masters, you must know that all Vedic sacrifices are done with the purpose of pleasing Lord Vishnu. So if Lord Vishnu has come here and he's wanting either to give me all benedictions or to punish me, but he's requesting me to give all the land, and at that time he was emperor of the entire world. He said, I have to do that without hesitating. That's the proper thing to do. So a very great personality, giving charity in the correct way. Now, so this is that position of power that Bali Maharaj attained that Akura is referring to. So the destination of pure devotees that Akura refers to for Bali Maharaj is that of receiving Lord Vamanadev's protection. So generally, you can see how different it is from persons who've made a choice to identify with material nature and to perform karmic activities. They're just looking for their own enjoyment. And see what the result is for a devotee giving in charity and proceeding, functioning with, identifying with spiritual nature. He receives the protection of Lord Vamanadev. He was to go and live on a planet called Sutala, where neither, and this is what the protection was, neither the predominating deities of other planets and neither ordinary people would be able to conquer Bali Maharaj. And if any of the demons were to transgress his rule, they would be killed by the Lord's disc. This is the protection he received. So he lost, you could say, his entire kingdom, but he was given a planet where he was completely protected, both by his fellow demoniac associates, the demigods, even ordinary humans. And nobody could actually usurp his power on that planet because he had the protection of Lord Vamanadev. So the Lord states, "O great hero, I shall always be with you and give you protection in all respects along with your associates and paraphernalia. Moreover, you will always be able to see me there." Quite extraordinary. Because there you will see my extreme prowess, your materialistic ideas and anxieties that have arisen from your association with the demons and Danavas will immediately be vanquished. So this is part of the protection that those, that part of identifying with material nature or even holding materialistic ideas, that gets vanquished by the Lord's protection. And this was the glorious, powerful position that Akura is referring to when he speaks about Bali Maharaj. And all of this resulted from that initial action of bathing the lotus feet of Lord Vamanadev. And this is part of why Akura is imploring Lord Krishna, please come to my house. So that destination is one that's free from all anxieties and materialistic ideas. And so it means that the burning fire of material life will be left for the shade of the lotus feet of the Lord. So those are some thoughts on these two verses. If there's any ideas or thoughts that can expand the discussion.
The prayer itself implies it's a spiritual motivation, but there's a motivation that he wanted to obtain that position like Bali Maharaj, the position of a perfected devotee, which is we can recognize ourselves with that. But you can also see the difference between Akrura and the Brijavasis. It specifically brings to mind the story of Krishna's headache and the gopis immediately just take. Doesn't matter if we go to hell or wherever we go, as long as Krishna is pleased. So there is that description of pure devotional service as there is no motivation, it's just unmotivated. So I'm wondering, obviously Akrura is a pure devotee, and Bali Maharaj, so many of these great personalities, pure devotees, but there's still, seems that there is still some level of, at least we'll say, spiritual motivation, and how that fits into the description of pure devotional service, that there is no motivation.
You're saying that there's some material motivation? Spiritual?
Obviously, it's not material motivation because they're pure devotees, but there is a motivation of, that They want to be, one wants to be in that position of intimacy with the Lord or something like that. So,
Well, if the generalization that's been made is that a devotee in general is a liberated person, that's the generalization that's made, liberated from the point of view that always there's identifying with spiritual nature, then even if it's a case of that the person's position is one of a sovereign, and the natural being of a sovereign is ruling land control, because of identifying with spiritual nature, that everything is done for serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there's no difficulty with that, because the nature is being employed in the direction of the soul's constitutional position. So the external is the sovereign with the land, the control, the power, but the internal is the servitorship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there's actually not, you could say, a lacking of purity. I mean, there's different relationships with the Supreme Personality of Godhead that manifest in a particular way. So Bali Maharaj having one of servitorship, but he's actually a sovereign. So, how is that possible to reconcile? Because internally, the servitorship is of a spiritual nature, and it's to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but the external is one of rulership and control. So even in the position that he was put in by Lord Vamadadev, was again a position of rulership, an entire planet. So he may not have been the emperor of the world any longer, but he still had an entire planet. But because of that internal servitorship relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he had a boon that is, or I don't know if boon's the right word, but he had the assurance of the protection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead from the practical reality of persons challenging his rulership even. So it's a different relationship, certainly, than the gopis, one of viewing Krishna as their husband, but then that's their position. On the external level, they're cowherd ladies. And so their activities are to do with child rearing, performing activities in the home. So on an internal level, the identification is that those activities are being performed for their husband, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the servitorship is of a different kind of relationship. But it doesn't mean that either of them, one has said it's the highest kind of relationship, the conjugal one, because of the degree of intimacy. But the other is, whether it's of Bali Maharaj or Akura, it's not that one would fault it in any way. It's perfect for the being and the external situation. The internal relationship is the distinction.
yeah, that's very good. Just what you say reminds me of Srila Prabhupada saying that a full cup is a full cup. You may have different sizes of cups, like you have the jumbo, you have this one, you have that one. But when they're full cups. So, like that.
Mataji, thank you for the class. Can you please explain again the things you said, that Krishna said that I am the fire, I am the offering, I am the butter. So what exactly does he mean by that? So it's a little confusing.
Yes. So in Vedic sacrifice, there's the sacrificial fire that's lit usually, and an offering is made into the sacrificial fire, because the idea is that uh, one wants to offer in order to receive something. So Krishna's describing that, and this, I mean, why I highlighted it was that persons who are identifying with material nature, often such a sacrificial arrangement or activity is done with the purpose of getting some enjoyment from it. So Krishna himself is highlighting that he is actually the sacrificial fire. So how that is so is that, there's earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And those are all material elements, but they're considered separated energies of Krishna. So by virtue of the fact that one of those elements, the sacrificial fire, is present in a sacrifice, then Krishna says he is actually that fire. So it means, the person identifying with material nature will see the fire is going to be, that sacrificial fire is going to be the future heavenly planet they want to attain, or the spouse that they're looking to acquire. But Krishna's bringing the other angle in, because that's, when you identify with spiritual nature, then you're going to see it differently. So that sacrificial fire is himself. And then the oblation, or the offering that's put into the fire, can be grains like we often witness fire sacrifices. So grains are put into the fire, and those grains are, he particularly says that he's the oblation, so the offering into the fire. So I find it easier to understand that he's the chanting of the mantras. How it relates specifically to the grains that are offered, Krishna being them, I don't think that was mentioned in the explanation of Srila Prabhupada on that particular verse, but certainly the ghee is considered to be an offering that is one with Krishna. I don't know if that sort of clarifies it in any way, but he's particularly wanting that identification with spiritual nature, and then seeing that sacrifice in the proper light, that you can't separate it from him. And generally a person viewing with a materialistic view will be seeing a fire and a grain, or a mantra, hearing a mantra, but not understanding that they're inseparable from Krishna. So that's the purpose of that statement of his, as I've understood it, and how it has relevance to this particular discussion of Akura's highlighting that even sacrificial fires will be satisfied by receiving the water of Krishna's lotus feet. So because you're offering something. So he's saying, you could even offer the water of Krishna's lotus feet to the sacrificial fire, and then everything's perfect. But in actual fact, Krishna says that the offering of ghee, it's him already. Particularly ghee, at least in the explanation, because that's what's was highlighted for when you're making offerings to the ancestors. And he says he is that ghee. Means his own statement. You can't separate out that's been put into the sacrificial fire for him as being separate from him, those ingredients. Yeah. I don't know, I'd have to think a little bit hard to break down, the connection of ghee to related to Krishna, but generally everything in the entire universe belongs to Krishna. So just from that broad perspective, you can take it that substance that's been put in the sacrificial fire, which is one of his separated energies, also has to be coming from him. So, yeah.
One more doubt I had, like Prabhu pointed out that Akrura and Bali and then the gopis. So we have these 5 rasas, and the Madhurya rasa includes all the 5 rasas. So it means that the Madhurya rasa or the gopis are at the higher level than Bali Maharaj or Akrura, though they are also pure devotees.
Yeah, higher level in terms of intimacy means the access to Krishna's heart is greater. It's like when one is very close in a personal relationship, you understand the inner workings of that individual. So the gopis can understand Krishna's desires perfectly. And they do everything to fulfill those desires. And personalities who don't have that conjugal or husband kind of relationship, which is, the most intimate kind of relationship one can have, but it's one of like a servant or serving in a chivalrous mood. The access to the heart will be different. It's a little bit more distant, more external. Yeah. So you couldn't, again, like the response to Subal, you can't consider one lower. That's not the correct way to make comparisons in that kind of way. It's just rather looking at it from the point of view of degree of intimacy and access to the heart of Krishna is more pronounced in a very intimate gopi kind of viewing Krishna as their husband kind of relationship versus viewing Krishna in a more chivalrous kind of relationship of serving him from a distance. Like, we hear all the praise of Akrura. He's talking about Krishna as the cause of everything. And even here, the water will, the water from your lotus feet, it's going to please the demigods, it's going to please the sacrificial fire. It's much more distant. Yeah, like that. So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.